Hello, Legal Helm listeners. Today, I am delighted to be speaking with Margot Thomas, founder and owner of Thomas Law. Margot is a highly experienced lawyer and speaker, having traveled throughout the United States as a faculty lecturer to educate over 4,000 attorneys on business litigation issues. In addition to this, she has been recognized as a Super Lawyers Rising Star, a top lawyer by Northern Virginia magazine, and one of the 2023 leaders in the law by Virginia Lawyers Weekly. As well as managing her own law firm, Margot has held numerous bar associations positions and served on various nonprofit boards. On today's podcast, I'll be talking with Margot about her journey starting a legal practice and her experience in building a successful business in a remote first environment. Margot, hello and welcome to the show.
Hello.
So, Margot, it would be great to learn a little bit about the journey that led you to founding and starting up your own law firm. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your journey.
And thank you for having me. I'm really excited. So a little bit about the background. I worked in some bigger firms out of law school, and I felt like it was a great opportunity to learn from a lot of very accomplished and distinguished other attorneys. And I did a lot of the same thing I do now, which is business litigation. We represented at that point a lot of banking institutions and defended claims that were brought against them by consumers for credit issues or debt issues or mortgage foreclosure issues and things like that. So I got a lot of court time very early on, and I was lucky enough to go to a firm that was small enough where they kind of throw you in and you get your feet wet immediately. So, I really enjoyed that opportunity and worked in that environment for almost 10 years. And then, I had a lot of personal things going on in my life. I got pregnant with twins and was on bed rest for a long time. My father passed away. We moved into another house, and all of this happened within like 6 months time frame. And being on bed rest and dealing with these other tragic situations, I just had a lot of time to think about what I wanted to do in the future. And I didn't see myself continuing that path and that firm, even though I enjoyed it a lot. And I had always thought about starting my own thing and kind of doing it my own way. And I was terrified of doing that, given that I was being paid and could rely upon a paycheck. And I didn't have a lot of clients. I didn't know how to generate business. Um, so, but it just was a spark at that time that it was something, time is valuable and we don't have as much of it as we may think. So, it just kind of got my gears turning. And a couple years after, I think about 3 years after that thought process started with me being on bed rest, I opened the door to Thomas Law, and now we're in our 8th year. So it's been quite a journey, to say the least.
That's amazing. Well, congratulations on 8 years. Where does that entrepreneurial spirit comes from? Because I'm pretty sure it's no easy conversation to have with yourself and your family to say, I'm, walking away from a paycheck that's regular and, is predictable, to actually taking a risk on something like this to set up your own law firm. So where does that entrepreneurial spirit come from?
I think about that a lot. It's a really good question because my brother also owns a company and he's been doing that and has been very successful in his entrepreneurial endeavors. So I'm like, where did that come from? Because both of my parents worked at jobs for 30 plus years, the same job. But my parents also invested in real estate. So they were, kind of entrepreneurs outside of their 9 to 5 jobs. And I guess maybe that experience of observing the real estate properties, and they owned quite a few during my childhood, kind of sparked that let's think outside of the box and, what else is out there. And maybe we can, push the limits of what's possible. So.
Excellent. No, that's great. So tell us a little bit about the kind of areas of law that you focus on at Thomas Law.
So I say we're business divorce lawyers. That's what we do. We help businesses that are breaking up or that have conflicts with their vendors or clients or business partners. So when I started the firm, I thought, I'll just jump to the other side and represent consumers who are suing small businesses. And I was in that realm, and I was like, I know it well because I've been on the other side, and I'll be great at this. And then I got out there, and I was like, I don't like this. This is not what I was thinking it would be. And I had always represented businesses, and I had always talked to business owners, even if it was in-house counsel at banks. Everything was a business decision. How much was it going to cost? what is the pros and cons of this? It was a lot less emotional or, let's talk about principle. It was more about what is in the best interest of the business, regardless of my emotional reaction to whatever is going on. And I just realized like that's how I solve problems. I think about it from that perspective. So it was very hard for me to switch to working with consumers who are concerned about a lot of other things that do not have to do with, the pros and cons of their business. A lot of them weren't even business owners, so it was very far outside of my thought process. So I was like, I got to get back into representing businesses. And then I was like, we got to narrow the focus. That's all we want to represent is people who are trying to grow and scale their business and are reaching conflict. And, a lot of them, it's not, they're not in conflict every day. They're family businesses, but they have a big hurdle to overcome when, you and your brother start a business and now you and your brother don't get along. And, you're working in this environment, which is volatile. And what do you do to get yourself out of this situation? It's even more difficult because you trust this person. It's usually a family member or a friend or someone you've known a very long time. So, you kind of have to weigh, what's good for the business, but also you have these emotional ties to this other person or the situation, which is all also in the background. So, I like that dynamic, and we have just kind of niched down to go to targeting people who are going through that exact situation and trying to help them through that process.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. I see a lot of businesses these days thinking about their growth strategies, right? And sometimes that does involve partnering with, like you said, internal members, I guess, like of family, etc., to help grow, get additional investment to grow, and those kind of things. But also, I'm seeing more and more these days external partnerships as well, right? Where there's an agreement between two parties that may complement one another in terms of bringing different services to the market. Are you seeing a lot of that? And is there, I guess, are there things that can be done from a preventative perspective to make sure that, you don't end up in those kind of heavy conversations and issues after, you have that breakup, that divorce that you kind of mentioned? Is there stuff that you can do in advance to make sure that you're kind of protecting the relationship in a positive way from the outcome as an outcome?
Absolutely. In fact, there's probably 25 things people could do. But I can tell you that the easiest ones are the most logical. Number one, get some good agreements that are going to govern that relationship. I would say a large majority of the conflict disputes we have are because people wrote on a napkin what they thought the agreement was going to be, or they didn't read the agreement and it doesn't say exactly what they thought it said. So the agreements are going to govern that relationship. This isn't an area of law that is usually based upon he said, she said type of things. There's usually going to be some agreement that they've written, and that agreement and whatever ambiguities or misunderstandings or how you phrase what you want in those agreements is really going to be pivotal to the outcome of that dispute. So, I mean, you would think that would become second nature, but there is a lot of people who just think, well, I'm going in the partnership with my friend or my family member, so that isn't top of mind because it's somebody that they trust. If they were going into a joint venture with a complete stranger, maybe they would think about that. Maybe they would give more thought to that. But a lot of the people that we talk to aren't strangers. They've worked with each other, or they've known each other through friends, or they have trust, through somebody that's, a mutual acquaintance. So that's not top of mind. I see a lot of people who use their house for collateral or, other assets that they have and it's not equal. And then they don't properly memorialize that in an agreement, which creates a lot of conflict down the line when your house is tied to a business and the other person's house isn't, and you haven't, memorialized what that's going to look like if there's a problem. That creates a lot of issues. But I think the fundamental thing is really has to do with communication and the same things you would do when you go into a marriage to make sure that you're fundamentally on the same page about you know, it's the big things, money, what your growth strategy is, how we're going to communicate, what parts of the business are you going to run, what parts am I going to run, how are we going to, we're 50-50 partners, how are we going to break a deadlock, those kind of things. I mean, it's the same thing when going into a marriage, like you want it to be all wonderful and easy, but we know there are going to be some difficult conversations, so let's get those out of the way first, right? Let's focus on that difficult stuff. and a lot of people want to focus on the let's grow it and let's build it and let's go. Like that's exciting. That's not the stuff people want to talk.
Yeah, no, it's really good point actually, and I think that transparency is key, right, at the start of the relationship, as it were, to make sure that there is success. That makes total sense. You touched on a really good point just now around uh, another area, I guess, of AI technology influencing the legal field, which your example is something that's probably less talked about, which is where ChatGPT is, or solutions like that are being used by a consumer in this case, rather than getting proper legal advice. And we're hearing more and more about solutions in the market that are helping law firms be more efficient in terms of how they deliver services to a consumer. How are you seeing the kind of technology piece of the puzzle impact you as a firm, both from the kind of consumer impact side that you just mentioned, and in terms of how you deliver services?
I love technology, and I think that technology and AI and all of the tools that we have available to us make us more efficient, and make the products that we can offer to our clients more cost effective, right? So I think it's wonderful to use them, but I think that there has to be a disclaimer as to in what circumstances do you need to use them and have them reviewed. You know, I think it's kind of reckless to think that this program is going to create, exactly what you need, and that there doesn't need to be any oversight into what product comes out of it. So maybe ChatGPT is great at creating an operating agreement, but then when you need to do an equity transfer, ChatGPT is not looking at the prior agreement to make sure that there are no ambiguities or uh, conflicting clauses between the documents. So you can have these two documents that on their own would be great, but now you've introduced additional hurdle that isn't being taken into account, and it is not uncommon for us to be in litigation with people who have lots of different agreements that cannot be read together. It's like, is it this clause or that clause, or they don't make the prior agreement null and void, so they're supposed to be read together, but this one has you know different voting clauses, this one has different dissolution. Like, how do we reconcile all of that? So I think that that may be a good starting point, but as in most things in life, I think it's good to take that information and hone it into what you need it to be.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Do you see the as time goes on, do you think that the fact that you are kind of thinking technology from a lawyer's perspective, you're kind of embracing technology, whether it be AI or other solutions, right? That can make your service to a consumer more efficient. Do you see that that becomes actually like a differentiator for you from a marketing perspective going forward?
Absolutely. The more efficient that we can be in providing the services that we provide, the more clients we can serve, the better the product we can produce. So yes, I mean, like I don't know if we've touched on this, but we have a remote team. So we have people in South Africa, and we have people in the Philippines, and we have people in North Carolina, and people in Maryland. And in order for us to all be able to collaborate and provide this service to the client and the quality that we want it to be at, we have to rely on technology. And the better we're able to do that, the better we're able to service our clients and differentiate ourselves.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to really how you went from that initial idea and thought of I'm starting a law firm, and you're a one person band at that point, to having such a distributed team. And what kind of, like, what was your first thought process in terms of getting to a point where, like, do I hire locally? Do I have people office based versus do I look at the talent pool in a wider respect? And actually, like, it's really interesting that you mentioned South Africa and Philippines. Like, what was driving some of those decisions to kind of look outside of country as well?
Well, I can say that I was never a fan of commuting. When I used to drive to work and I worked at a firm, I always thought, I could be so much more efficient if I did not have to sit in my car and drive to this office to do the same thing that I could do from home. And there were so many people who were like, this office environment is just, we need this dynamic. And I was never a huge believer of that. I always thought there's nothing that I have to do here that I can't do at home. And I'm very introverted. I like working from home. I'm very productive at home, so I always just felt like it was a waste of time. And I used to commute. Like in Northern Virginia, we have some of the worst traffic in the country, so I used to sit in traffic every single day. And then by the time I got to work, my mindset was just so like frustrated because I've been sitting in this horrific traffic for so long to get to this place to do something on a computer that I brought from my house to do, right? So when I started my firm, I was already thinking, how do we do this remotely? How do I do this from my kitchen table? And I hire people who are really good at what they do and wherever they are to collaborate to get this done. So I was not printing out, legal binders. I was trying to figure out a way to do this paperless because that's the only way that makes this really efficient. So I think that for me, it was very helpful that that was how we started. It wasn't so much of a transition. A lot of people, when COVID happened, they were like, we gotta like figure out how we can do this differently. But for me, I think we were ahead of the game because we were already doing it that way. So we didn't have to shift. The big shift that happened for me was we have a physical office in Fairfax, which is right near the courthouse. Fairfax is the largest county in Virginia. And, I just thought it's good to have an address. Usually we meet with people. Occasionally people ask us to meet with them. So I thought, let's keep the office. It's not a huge expense, right? And then I think this year was like, even if people ask for an initial consult for us to come to the office to meet them, we're taking that option away. Even though we have a space, we could go. We're in the area, but enough of us are in the area. We could go there, but it became so inefficient to do that when we could do it via Zoom. So I could have 3 consults in the time it would take me to go to the office to meet you in person. And because of the type of work that we do, it's very document intensive. And it's not so much based upon your credibility or things that you say in that meeting. It's more based upon what documents did you sign to get here and how are those documents likely to be interpreted, which makes our face to face communication even less important. I think Zoom is great, but a lot of people um, I guess the negative thing they say about Zoom is you can't feel the environment. You don't get the vibe of people. But in my profession, that's of very little importance. So to be able to pivot to totally remote, even though we could potentially meet with people, and we were at some point in an environment where the courts were also remote, which was also very helpful because we can have all of our hearings remotely. They have pivoted back to being in person, which is unfortunate. But I like I said, I think that we were already thinking about that, and I never thought we need to have somebody down the street. If there is a great legal assistant in South Africa, let's hire them. If there's someone in Texas, what's the barrier? So I've always posted the ads more broadly, and whoever was able to fill that position, that would be a cultural fit for our firm, we hired. So we never saw that as a barrier.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so, are there any challenges that you face in terms of onboarding? Because I think one of the things that has been, I guess, when you look at the way that a traditional firm would operate in like a very office kind of driven environment a few years ago, you would typically like hire a bunch of junior associates to then onboard and kind of just live and breathe within that. Well, the same way that I'm sure learn how to practice law through that experience of like seeing some of those senior lawyers doing their thing, watching and learning as you are in an office environment. How does that get replaced in this world? So if you've got a distributed team and you're a business kind of with people maybe outside a country as well, so dealing with time zones and all the rest of it, how do you grow talent? Like how do you make sure that you can grow and maintain talent so that then in 5 years time, 10 years time, you can get to a point where you've still got that dependable team that's delivering for you, but you've been able to kind of work people up the ranks as well? Or is it kind of a different mindset for this type of approach?
I don't think so because when I was watching and learning, it was basically me being in a physical room with another individual who's like, I read this brief and these are the key points that I think that we need to refine or think about or, edit in some degree. That's the same Zoom call we have now, and now we have the tools where you can be in the document, marking it up, and I can be in the document seeing you do that, or you putting in comments, and we can be talking about it together at the same time. So I think it's probably even more advanced if you use the tools correctly in order to collaborate on things. I mean, there was no way to do that when I started. There wasn't, multiple user. We could edit documents at the same time. I don't think that functionality was there when I started almost 20 years ago. So the fact that we have that and you can see in real time, what I'm thinking about as far as edits to these documents. People, they have some jurisdictions that still have Zoom hearings, like in DC, so we can have junior associates like watch hearings. To the extent things are in this area, we have some staff that are local and they can go to the courthouse. But I think the watching and learning and growing talent is the same. It's just how much time you want to dedicate to the people. I don't think that time needs to be in person.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And it's interesting because just I recently had an example of this where we were out at a client, like a face-to-face client meeting after a long time, right? Because like you say, a lot of the meetings we do are either via Zoom or Teams. And it was funny because we've become so used to having the AI transcription service on a meeting that when we were in the meeting, we left and I looked around to my team and I said, who took notes? And everyone had literally forgotten to take notes because they were so used to just clicking a button and it doing it for you. I was like, we didn't have, teams in the room with us, unfortunately. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, I think it's one of those things where we can leverage some of this technology to actually make us a lot more efficient, right? And I think, you make a great point about being able to achieve much more in a shorter time frame, so serving more customers by leveraging some of the tools and technology around it. And I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but in terms of the relationship side of things, particularly with new business, like when you're going after new business, does this impact you in any way in terms of having to deal with clients remotely? Like we deal with some customers that will only meet in person, right? So they're just of the mindset that I have to meet you in person before I sign a contract with you to work with you, right? Because they just want to establish a relationship. Do you get that kind of thing happening, and how do you get around that from the relationship building side of things, especially with new clients?
We lose those clients. I
Yeah.
mean, and that was the line
Mm,
we had to draw.
mm,
How many of those clients are there versus the clients who will, work within the parameters of how we set this up to be efficient for
mm.
us, right? And there's always going to be some outliers where, like, I want to see you in person. I want to shake your hand. I want to come to your office. I want you to show me around what it looks like. And there's nothing wrong with that. But this isn't the best fit for that client because we're not the best fit for clients who have a box of documents that are, in disarray that, they want to go through the documents together. Like, we are the firm where we need you to scan all that stuff in so that we can organize it and, we can pull the pertinent information from those documents. Like, occasionally we'll have somebody drop off something and we'll scan it for you, but like, we're putting ourselves in a position to service a particular type of client. And we understand that we will lose other clients in that process. But if we do this segment of society well, it won't matter. And that's what we had to figure out. Yes, there's going to be somebody who calls and says, well, if you're not going to meet me in person, I don't want you to be my lawyer. And I have to be okay with saying, well, that's it. And it took me a long time to get there because I was like, am I just lazy? Because I could go meet this person. The office is not that far. I actually do have an office. It's not like this is like not real. It would be very easy for me to do that. But when I think about the big picture of, the efficiency piece, which is very key, how many other people can we service by doing this way, which we believe is more efficient? And if this person is not willing to bend to the way that we have this set up, they're likely not going to be our ideal client.
I think that's right. Like you kind of have to draw the line and just say this is my approach to market, and doing what you need to do to kind of grow in that way. So yeah, I think that's a great take on it actually. So for those businesses that are trying to adapt to remote working and remote operations, are there any legal considerations that they need to consider from protecting their business perspective and their employees with this kind of setup?
So we see a lot more of that now in our business partnership disputes, technology issues because people are remote. And I could say the number one thing, which I never would have guessed would be the number one issue, is like two-factor authentication. We see that as a problem in a lot of cases because somebody has the two-factor tied to their personal cell phone, right? And then they leave. And then, it's very difficult to get a lot of service providers to overstep that to give access to people who are still in the business because that authentication piece is huge, especially with online companies, if you are unable to authenticate, if they can't send a code to this telephone number or this email address, and you're like, well, I don't have that phone anymore. That's not my number. That person left. It creates so many level of ripple effects of problems for the business owner who's still in the business. And I don't think people think twice about what number that's going to be tied to. And it's very easy for people to tie that to this cell phone, not a business phone, not a, Vonage number, but like their personal cell phone where they're getting those text messages. People don't even think about it. And it creates, I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've been in court, like requiring this person to change the two-factor authentication to a number that is associated with the business so that they can continue on in the business, and how debilitating that can be for a business because people's domain is tied to that, their Google is tied to that, their phone number might be tied to that. I mean, they have so many things in their business that require some type of authentication, and people just tie that to their personal devices routinely, and that creates a big issue. When I was a younger attorney, that wasn't an issue that I saw coming out. I don't remember any circumstance where I was at my computer at my job 20 years ago and they were like, give us your personal cell phone number so we can send you a code so that you can authenticate. I mean, that's a relatively new concept that has created a lot of issues.
Yeah, that's a very good point actually, because especially with the kind of drive towards cloud computing and cloud solutions, it's even more exacerbated because ultimately you no longer own the hardware that the software sits on, right? It's sitting up in the cloud and someone else has the keys to that engine. So yeah, that makes total sense. That's also a great segue into some of the technology side of things. Are you 100% kind of cloud solution based in terms of the solutions that you use, and what would you say are the kind of key drivers to success when it comes to some of the solutions that you've selected as to kind of run your practice on?
Hey John, how do I find out what we've invoiced my client?
How can I view my outstanding WIP?
How do I submit my expenses again?
Do we have next Monday off?
Monday off?
It's exciting to have fresh faces at your law firm, but onboarding them takes a lot of time and a lot of energy when everyone is remote. You're busy enough as it is. Helm 360 has the solution. Just ask Termi, Helm 360's next-level chatbot solution for knowledge management. Termi can answer many of your new hires' questions for you without distracting you or anyone else at the firm. This means fewer frantic emails, fewer help desk tickets, more time and more focused productivity for everyone at the firm. Working with Termi, you can have those eager new employees up to speed in a snap. They may never need to ask you a question again. Check out helm360.com/Termi to see Termi in action and find out how it can make onboarding new hires as easy as sending an email.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you have a remote team, you've got to have solutions to technology issues that everybody is easily able to access and use and navigate. Done a lot of research on the front end into what those solutions are because our practice is constantly changing and people are coming in and it's growing, and that requires us to look at new solutions for problems that we didn't have before. So like the most recent issue was project management. Like we have a case management system that was doing great, but when you bring in more people and then we have marketing projects and admin projects and legal projects, it wasn't lending itself to all of the rest of the stuff that also needed to be managed. So we needed to move to a project management software where we could all kind of collaborate together. And it took, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 months to just research. I mean, there's just a laundry list of different options and figuring out what would be the easiest for us to implement and to onboard people and what their training was like and what kind of assistance they would give us and whether we would need to build out certain portions of it. There was just a lot of questions about that. And I think that, putting a lot of thought into that solution on the front end and making sure that it's adaptable to whatever environment you have built is huge. And, we really rely upon that technology so much that it's got to be functional. So, we have practice management. We use Microsoft for, all of our email and document storage, and then
I think it's underestimated as to how much is involved, right, in just managing the technology stack. And I think in the older days, when you had those softwares running within your environments, you had like complete control over it. There was other headaches you had to deal with in terms of managing the data centers and managing the servers and hardware. But you ultimately had full control over the software delivery process, and you were kind of in control. I think one of the challenges that we see a lot and firms struggling with more these days is when you are 100% cloud and you have different solutions in the cloud, the challenge becomes, I think you touched on a great point, is that you've got to do your selection process, right? So you have to understand what is actually going to work for you, and it's not enough to sit through a demo. You kind of need to get into trials and kind of make sure that the software is doing what it says on the tin. But I think also then the other piece of the puzzle is then how do they talk to each other, right? And making sure that from an integration perspective, there's a thought about how not only how do you get it connected, but then how do you make sure it stays connected, right? Because that seems to be another big challenge that firms are facing with this kind of not just cloud but hybrid, on-prem and cloud mix.
Then how do you get people to use it?
Yeah.
That's the next hurdle.
Yes.
So,
yeah, and that's a great point, right? Like training and education on all of the different systems, and as they evolve so quickly as well, is definitely another part of it. And actually, it kind of leads me to a question around culture of a business that is kind of remote like yours. Are there any tips or tricks that you can share with the audience in terms of how do you keep people engaged? How do you make sure that, from a company culture perspective, that your team is feeling connected, when they're not necessarily physically sitting next to you?
I struggle with that. I think that is a real challenge with remote teams, and probably the biggest challenge that I've faced as we've grown, because I find I'm more of an introverted person that doesn't need a lot of like interaction with other people in order to feel like I'm part of this, right? But I know that other people do need more of that interaction than I do. So, and finding ways to do that. And we started with doing virtual lunches where we would all just get together and talk, and then we decided to bring in some speakers to talk about certain things. And that has been really helpful because they've talked about topics that bring up talking points that we never would have, that make us learn more about each other. We have in-person dinners twice a year, and flying people in to come to those has become important. So a lot of at our last one, which was a few weeks ago, there are people that I've never seen in person who came, and it was very interesting to have that interaction. I think it's like a constant analysis of what more can we do to build that element, because I think that when you're in an office and there's a water cooler and people are just like in the environment to talk about things going on outside of work and what's frustrating them, that kind of has to be fabricated to an extent in the remote world because you're not together, right? So, you can be in front of your computer and not talk to anybody all day and nobody would, raise a finger, like if you were in your office environment, you'd have to walk past people, you'd have to go get your lunch, you'd have to say hi to Bob, you know what I mean? Like you have to do those type of things. So, I am constantly looking for new ways to do that. I'd like to host a virtual retreat for everybody to take off the day and bring in some people and have some team exercises and things like that. Talk about goals and strategies, and I'm trying to figure out a way to coordinate that so that we can have some more culture and spend some more time with each other. And we'll see how that goes. But that's my next goal is to try to get that off the ground.
I think that's a great take on it. And I think the idea about speakers is actually really good, because I know that we all, I think a lot of people can relate to the fact that there was a bit of, Zoom fatigue through the number of webinars that were launched over the COVID period, right? But actually, the benefit now is that if you're bringing somebody in that is speaking on a topic, and there's a little interaction involved, I think there's a lot of value for the individual, right? Because it's basically like enhancing their knowledge. So it's something that's exciting for them to be part of. And it's almost like you're giving back, right? You're giving back to the employees to enhance their profile a little bit and give them skills that maybe they didn't have before. So I love that. I think that's a good incentive for people to come together, as well as the fun stuff. There's also the self-development stuff, I think, makes a big difference. So really, really glad to hear you're investing in that area, and be very interested to see how your event goes in terms of the retreat. I like the sound of that. It's good. So I do want to not leave without talking about flying cars and flying houses. I had a very fun read of your website, and this was actually really cool. The Negotiator comic. Tell our audience about how that came about, because if anyone hasn't seen it, I highly recommend going to check it out, because it's something that I've never seen before on a law firm's website, and it's actually pretty cool.
It's funny you bring that up. Yeah. So my son is super into comic books and art. I mean, our house is covered with art books and paper and drawing just everywhere. He is, all in when it comes to art. And he wanted to make a comic book, and he wanted to make it about. So he has a twin brother, and he wanted his brother to be in it, and I have a daughter as well, and he wanted her to be in it, and we just started talking about the plot, and I'm in the process of writing a negotiation book about becoming a better negotiator for my clients and educating other lawyers. And somehow that negotiation concept merged with his cartoon. And it's a really fun project. We actually hired an illustrator from Upwork, the virtual platform, and he was involved in like looking at all of the illustrators' work. And he had done his own sketches, and then they kind of took his sketches and added more to them, and just going through the process with him of talking with people online who could make his vision come to life, and the editing of the story and everything. It was a really cool process, and then we were like, might as well get it copyrighted. So he ended up getting it copyrighted, and he was really excited about that, and started selling like books at school, and it became a whole thing, and now he's working on the second series. So it was cool. But the fact that it could be about lawyers and negotiation, I was really honored to have that, have him want to write about that. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it's really, really fun take on it. So you have a very, very talented son there. So really nice to see that. So Margot, I just have a couple of wrap-up questions I ask all of the guests that come on my show. The first of which is, if you could borrow Doctor Who's time machine and go back to Margot at 18 years old, what advice would you give her?
Margot at 18. Maybe I would have started sooner. I think that a lot of my adulthood was kind of catastrophizing what could happen if I bet on myself and if I pursued a road less traveled. And I think I love what I do, and I wouldn't give it up for anything. And I wish I had reached that point of clarity, sooner in life. I just think fear can be paralyzing, and I would just tell my younger self that you got to bet on yourself. So
amazing. That's great advice. And second question is, what's your favorite travel destination?
That's a great one. I love to travel. Really, really like Dubai. It's probably up there. I really like Curacao.
Yep.
It's probably like my 1 and 2. So
very nice, very nice. Well, as I ask these questions to the guests, they get added to my bucket list, right? The ones that sound interesting. So thank you for that. Any closing thoughts or advice that you think would benefit the legal professionals in our audience today?
I'm a huge promoter of entrepreneurship. I understand that it's not the path for everyone, but if there are people who are listening to this who are considering the path of entrepreneurship, and I've listened to a lot of your prior episodes, and there's some with lawyers who are like, I want to create this product that will make the legal field better, and I think that goes back to my betting on yourself. Like, entrepreneurship is definitely a roller coaster, but it has so many thrills and opportunities associated with it. And, if you're an entrepreneur or potential entrepreneur while listening to this, I would just say, to follow and lean into that, lean into it. I think it is totally worth it. I think it's worth every risk, every fail, every hiccup, every scrape. Like, I think it is all worth it in the end. And if you don't try, you'll never know. So.
Fantastic. Margot, it's been a pleasure having you on today. Thank you for taking some time out to speak with me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Legal Helm. Thank you as always for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps us out.